All right, people, we're back for yet another episode of Talkin' Thrones. This time we're talking Season 5, Episode 6, entitled Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken, famously named after House Martell's family words. It also seems to be a looming theme that overhangs this entire episode, of that the characters are on a definitive course that they are not deviating from in any way, shape, or form. Pat, you ready for tonight's episode?
Yeah, I definitely am, and I think the Talking TV audience here, that's joining us in Talking Thrones, is going to expect that, hey, it's unknown where the actual Dorne storyline will go.
Yeah, I feel like that's a mystery that nobody would be able to figure out because the show itself didn't even want to figure it out.
Yeah, years later, I'm just waiting for it.
Still figure it out. Still waiting. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. All right, Pat. So this is an episode that for the longest time I was dreading getting to because this episode has gone down in history as being hailed as one of the worst, if not the worst, Game of Thrones episode ever, at least until the final couple episodes. And I gotta say that probably the most surprising thing for me upon rewatching it was that I'm like, wow, this episode was not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I personally thought the last 2 weeks worth of episodes were a lot slower, a lot more trudging, a lot less action happened, a lot more obvious stupidity with the plot line.
Dom, anybody that's listened to the last 2 episodes,
they know.
They're probably no longer listeners because we've just been complaining for 2 consecutive hours.
Well, hey, that's what happens
when
you have that's what happens when you have a marked drop in quality for your show when it's only the most hailed show of the last quarter century. But yeah,
why are we hate watching? I guess it's like
hey man, people like
love a little hate.
It's got to equal out somewhere. And hey, the one thing that I will say, the one thing that I have learned in my last couple of years of doing this online is that look, people love to hate watch stuff as much as they do like it. I personally don't understand it because I don't want to watch something that I don't like. But hey, there are other people that get a kick out of it. So you know what? I guess if they want to have their cake and eat it too, by all means.
Yeah, we should have skipped a couple episodes. Like just like a quick recap at the end of one of these episodes.
Well, look, like I said, when I say
we're skipping.
Well, look, when I say we're doing a show where we recap every episode, we're gonna do every episode. That means the good, that means the bad, and that means the ugly. So hey, if we gotta get a little bit more critical,
you gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Indeed. Yeah. So I guess if that means that we gotta get a little bit more critical now than we have been in the past, well, so be it. So Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken. This is a controversial episode for 2 big different reasons. Number one being that this is the one where we famously get the Dorne fight between Jaime Lannister and Bronn and the Sand Snakes, and reason number 2 being that this is the episode that involves the infamous Sansa Ramsay controversial rape sequence. And Pat, I remember you told me something really interesting about this episode I feel like when we were first like marinating and talking about the idea of doing the show and whatnot. I was wondering if you could share that story with the audience right now.
Yeah, well, way to put me on the spot, Tom. But but yeah, so when I watched this show, a bunch of us, just a group of my friends, we were doing dinner parties and going to each other's apartments once a week and making like a potluck out of it. And I think this was like the episode that was like the beginning of the end of our potlucks because it was just
nothing ruins potlucks like just than rape scenes.
Yeah, no, it's the consensus, I guess, from the group was just like it was completely unnecessary, and like the show had really fallen to a point where it wasn't like this big spectacle anymore. And I think obviously life happens and situations change for a group of friends, and it becomes maybe less sustainable to do a weekly party each season for the show. But we continue to do potlucks and watch episodes of the show, but probably not every single episode. Some episodes it was like, yeah, we're gonna watch this one on our own tonight. So it's one of those things where like, I think that group of friends became less enthusiastic over the show, and maybe they sort of like binged a couple episodes in a row instead of just watching week to week. And so I think it was one of those things there. It kind of definitely set a new tone for the story going forward. And, from what I remember, it basically, it kind of diminished the spectacle of it all.
Well, the biggest biggest thing about it is the fact that, for a number of different reasons. Number one, the fact that it seems to set Sansa's character development back so far. When we'd spent so long of seeing her just be tortured mercilessly nonstop in this one location, she finally gets away. She finally seems to be getting to a place where she's actually like starting to take a little bit more agency, starting to take a little bit more responsibility, starting to understand how the world works a little bit more, but also just, finally getting away from a place where she's just kind of like treated like an object. And this just brings it right back to that. So that's reason number one. Reason number two being is that even though this sequence is sort of directly adapted from the books, like I said, this storyline is in the books. It's just they swap out, they do what they did with Gendry a couple seasons ago, where they use Sansa as the replacement for a different minor character that was not included in the show at all. We never actually see it. The whole thing is that because it's all from Theon's perspective, we overhear it in the background, and we are meant to perceive just how savage it is, which effectively makes it more horrifying in our minds, right? That idea of, the thing that you can't see is scarier than the thing you can see. But here they just put it on full display and full blast here. And that just, it makes it uncomfortable for many different reasons. And for people who may have, personally, I can't see how anybody would defend this sequence at all and just its presentation of it. But I guess the difference between this and other sex scenes that happened before in the show is that this is really the first time that a sex scene happened in the show that just felt tasteless. There just felt like there was no reason for it at all. And it kind of just really put a damper on. And the show already didn't have a great trajectory, at least this past season to begin with, but this sequence just kind of brought it dead stop to a halt, And like I said, it's we're deviating away from it a little bit, but this episode also, like I said, outside of really those two sequences, I personally don't hate this episode. It catches us up on all the storylines that we didn't get a chance to do last week. Last week we primarily were at the Wall and in Meereen. This episode we spend more time. We're in King's Landing. We're back in Braavos in the House of Black and White. What's it called? We follow a little bit more so along with Tyrion and Jorah, and we also get we also get back to Dorne as well. So then you have this sequence. Like I said, it brings the action dead to a halt, and it's just one of those things that I go back and constantly question over and over again. Just why? Why the need to demonstrate this?
Yeah, the only thing I'll really say is I think what they were thinking was this is going to cement Ramsay as the next big bad. He has to be taken care of right away. He's just such a terrible person. And, I guess it does that, but at the same time,
as if the mutilation and torture that he was doing over the last couple seasons didn't already cement that enough.
Exactly. So I think it's just another brutal act that Ramsay does that kind of puts it over the top, and it's meant to really get you in that trajectory for Battle of the Bastards. Ramsay is just willing to do whatever it is. He's really sadistic. He is beyond what Joffrey ever was. And I think that's sort of, what they're trying to do with this sequence, to elevate him to sort of, this villain that must be stopped at all costs. And, it's you don't even want to watch a moment with him from this point on, right, because he's so villainous and so just despicable. Disgusting. So, I think that maybe that's what the intention is, if I had to guess. But at the end of the day, it's I don't know what to say about it.
Well, the other
it's
problem
not like the scene that I was begging for,
Well, obviously, but the other problem too that comes from it is I think the distinct difference also between Joffrey and Ramsay is the fact that I think that Joffrey always came off as a petulant child, so there was always an inherent unlikability to him as a character, where even though he was so despicable and did all these horrible acts, you could tell he was doing it from the placement of a spoiled child that also happened to be a little bit sociopathic. So that's the other thing too. Ramsay, the difference being is that Ramsay is a full-on adult, and the fact that Ewan Rand does such a good job and brings such an inherent charm to that character despite how much of a sociopath he is. I feel like Benioff and Weiss felt like they needed to do extra work in order to cement, no, you thought Joffrey was bad. You really, really got to see how bad this guy is, And it's just the problem of, it's especially given the fact that, he seemed to be doing all this extra work in order to, try and appear courteous to Sansa, but then he does the thing with Theon less. I don't know. I personally feel in a strange way, less was needed in a strange way. I think Ramsay having inherently, I think this season is the season where he has the most screen time since season 3, and I think the trouble comes from Ramsay having ultimately more screen time than is ultimately needed in order to sell just the despicable. To me, you only needed the intro episode with you only needed the intro episode and then this episode if you're gonna do this and cement to it. I think a big problem comes from the fact that we ultimately spent too much time with him and his father, and them and their planning, versus Ramsay as a character really doesn't get that much page time in the book. He's ultimately more of a force rather than an actual character, versus Joffrey, who's ultimately played up more like a character, which is what makes him that much more terrifying and that much more despicable, because you don't spend that much time with him. Therefore, you don't get to know him and almost empathize with him as a character. And it also doesn't help that we got that whole tragic backstory from Roose in the last episode as well, about how, he in his younger days, sired Ramsay on some poor farmer woman, and then realized that he was his, in order to like endear him to a character. It's really weird what they do with him constantly, where they're trying to make us where they almost did too good of a job endearing us to him, and now they like got to double back and be like, oh nope, remember, you hate this character, bad guy,
Yeah, I think with Roose Bolton, his storyline kind of is pushed to the side, and it's all about Ramsay. And I think one of the things that is forgotten here is the fact that Ramsay doesn't know his place if Bruce has another child, right? He's going to become second in line, and that's something that weighs down on Ramsay as a character. But that's not really an indication here that he has to basically marry Sansa, have a child of his own, or anything like that. It would be interesting, like if for some reason Ramsay felt like he needed to expedite his relationship with Sansa, and that's what leads to this moment. Like there's no real setup in terms of why this has to happen other than he's sadistic. But if it was tied into something to do with like his father and competing with him, or like something where it might just kind of fit the characters or the world, and just this is something that the Boltons kind of like do partake in, another like level of their sadism, that might be something that we can understand and see visualized on the screen. Other than that, it's just like, hey, we're going to show the audience this despicable scene, and forever assign evil dude to Ramsay. And was it necessary? I think what you said, like he already seemed to be bad guy,
right?
So you're basically just doing a gratuitous scene to add to that, to make sure everybody in the audience knew how bad he was.
Right. As if
I
they
think
didn't
everybody
know.
everybody knew that. So
not to mention the fact it makes it even more confusing, because there's also, so now you have a compounding emotion. So it would have been, if anything, I'll almost double back on your point, where it almost felt like him being sadistic was all the motivation that you needed. But now you have this thing, this back and forth, him not knowing his place with his father, and then you also have this love triangle thing that comes with Miranda. So now it makes it even more confusing, because now rather than it being what it should be, which is a very cut and dry example of, no, he's doing this because he's fucking sadistic and because he delights in hurting and torturing other people. Now you're asking yourself, you're like, oh, okay, what is this coming from? Is this coming from like his need to exercise like his Bolton, the Boltons have officially gained control over the Starks, and this is him showing that? Like, is it having something to do with his father? Is it something to do with Miranda? We don't know what the hell. So that just makes it even more confusing, just where the motivation comes from. Is he doing this, for Theon's sake more than Sansa, just to continue to torture Theon? We don't know, like, because then we ultimately know too much about him as a character now. I don't think I've ever seen this before in any sort of fiction, where obviously, the thing that makes a good villain to me is the fact that a little bit about him, but it's more so the fact of like, they're more of a force to be reckoned with, unless you're trying to set them up as this tragic figure, which is not what they're trying to do with Ramsay at all. So if anything, it's like I said, they've almost humanized him to a fault, if that makes any sense.
What I would say, I'm just like thinking in my mind, like how to make this a better storyline. And, it's Littlefinger has this plan, right? He's going to send Sansa to Winterfell. The Boltons are going to be removed, and Stannis is going to find Sansa there and really restore the Starks. And the Starks and Littlefinger are going to have this grand old alliance and solidify power in a large portion of the kingdom. What if the Boltons knew that, and, part of the whole, wedding and really Ramsay assaulting Sansa, it had to do with the fact that we need to cement this marriage. We need to make sure that there's a Bolton heir that Sansa's going to give birth to. Like, this is the way that we solidify our power in the North. There's no like clear struggle
Right.
to the political landscape that we can see in this scene. It's
Right.
just he is evil incarnate, and I think it's lacking the depth of storytelling that we want from a scene like this. It's a horrific scene, but can you imagine if there was some story weight behind it
Right.
that really like, oh my, this is like, it's complex, and there's like reasoning behind
what Game of Thrones used to be.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, it's gratuitous, and I think that just leaves just a bad taste in the mouth. It's just like, okay, I didn't need that because it doesn't really add to the story. It just, oh yeah, sure, it happened in lesser times, in humanity. But like, the fact is, this is entertainment. It's all about the story, and it should be story and character driven, and there should be some layers and themes and things that we really can connect to. And this is a scene that doesn't really open us up for connection. It basically shuts us down and says, I didn't need to see that.
Yeah. To me, the only thing that it serves is just in order to get Sansa to motivate Jon to do the Battle of the Bastards, which is crazy to me because it's like Jon shouldn't need any extra outside motivation from Sansa to participate in Battle of the Bastards. And that may be a criticism best saved for season 6 rather than this season. But that to me was always just really confusing, where it's like Sansa is the one with the beef with Ramsay, right? This is not like a Stannis situation where you have Stannis marching against the Boltons and wanted to take them back so that he can claim the ancestral seat of Winterfell and gain the alliance of the North. Again, a much more tactical reasoning. Instead you have like a more emotional reasoning behind it, which again is not really what Game of Thrones has been about up to this point. So and that's just kind of where the source of my confusion comes from as well. Especially having now seen not only the scene in the moment, but also, what comes directly as a result of the scene. Because we know that, again, Game of Thrones is a show that is still about cause and effect, even at its more weaker points. But I guess this just goes to show, like, what a weak cause and effect is, versus something that is actually, inherently placed for the purpose of moving the story forward. And this was just not it. And again, it shows because in the books, this is another instance where I'll say the books did it better, because in the books, this was not a thing that pushed the story forward. This was a thing that was happening in the background, that one of our characters was having to deal with. This was not a deliberately placed event that was supposed to push the story forward. So I'm glad that you mentioned Littlefinger, because in that case we can kind of shift away from this. I feel like we've talked about it enough. We don't really need to talk about this sequence that much more. There's really not that much more to talk about aside from more of the continuation of the dumb Miranda, Sansa, Ramsay love triangle, which thank God that's resolved with really quickly, and they don't spend that much more time with it than they really need to, which is the King's Landing. Like, so we're back in King's Landing this episode. We took a break from it last episode. Do you want to take this? Because I mean, I don't know where to start first.
Well, the only thing I'm going to say is Littlefinger has a zinger of a line.
Oh
where
my God!
He's met by Lancel at the gates, and Littlefinger's like, "What? I'm here to see the Queen Mother because she sent for me.
She summoned me."
And Lancel's like, "Things have changed in this town, and what yada yada yada." And for the most part, Littlefinger just kind of says, "Hey, listen, we're both peddling fantasies, but at least mine are entertaining."
That was funny.
And
that was good.
Yeah, that was a great line.
That was awesome.
It's great that Littlefinger is backing King's Landing, and the fact is, like, he's made his money, and now he has a different source of income, a different level of power, and so I think that's the great part about his character is that in the earlier seasons, basically before season 4, before the Joffrey wedding, he is this business owner that is dealing in vices and making his money and really, working at growing his power. But now his transformation is, fully complete. He is a lord, someone that can travel around the realm and really sustain himself and have this power. And when he's confronted over these bordellos in King's Landing, it's like, I don't make my money that way anymore.
Right.
And even if he did, it's like, he's just taxing the people that run those establishments. Like, he's not someone that, has to roll up his sleeves and, run those establishments anymore. He is something much bigger. And I think it subtly says that in this scene and in this interaction between Lancel and himself. And so I think that is really a fantastic moment here. That it's very short, it's very sweet, but it really says a lot about the character and where he's come these last few seasons.
Yeah, Littlefinger has ascended the social ladder tremendously. And the biggest thing that I had here is just Littlefinger just running circles around Cersei, who is too busy trying to stick it to the Tyrells that she doesn't realize just how stupid it is putting all of her faith in Littlefinger. Like, her scene with Littlefinger and then her scene with Olenna are just the ultimate, like, kind of breaking down the walls of Cersei's intelligence. Just like Cersei has no idea what she's doing. Like, she's putting all of this faith in Littlefinger. She's thinking that she's completely got one up on Olenna when Olenna is rightfully pointing out, it's like, you all of a sudden have no more need for our crops, for our troops, for our supplies that we're providing. We are allies in this, but the street goes both ways, which is that if you but deliberately have one of our family members in prison, then we're not gonna continue to supplant this alliance. And Cersei is like, and she's still playing dumb. She's like, it wasn't me. It was the Faith Militant. I'll make sure that, everything is set right, whatever. But the thing that had me chuckling, laughing, is when Littlefinger tells her, like, yes, through my sources, I've learned that Sansa has returned to Winterfell. And I'm like, if I'm Cersei Lannister, right, my first question would be like, how did you come to find this information out? And if he says through his sources, again, Cersei is a character who just not even 2 seasons ago was willing to have Littlefinger killed for like even a whiff of like potential treachery, and he tells her this, and she's not even gonna bat an eye about how he's come to find this out. And she's not even gonna suspect him a little bit. And then on top of that, he's like, oh, well, just so don't worry, I'm going to do you this solid. You're too far from King's Landing. I've learned also that Stannis Baratheon is going to wage war with the Boltons, So she's like, okay, so you're going to bring the Knights of the Vale, take them north, and you're going to beat whoever the victor is. It's like, okay, first of all, fat chance of that, because there's no way in hell the Knights of the Vale have more soldiers than the Boltons and or Stannis' army. And 2, it's like, so you're going to also, take down your another potential set of allies who, unlike Littlefinger, have actually proven to be undersized. It's just the levels of stupidity that are in this episode. It makes me laugh every single time. And then you also have this whole mock trial thing, which is just hilarious because like you have Loras vehemently denying all of this, and then they bring in Oliver, who is a little snake also. But I'm also just thinking to myself, I'm like, doesn't that incriminate you if you're testifying against Loras? Because, obviously we know that the Faith Militant looks down upon all homosexual acts. So you incriminate yourself as Loras' lover?
They offered him a deal, clearly. This is like a sham of a trial. But
obviously, but I'm just thinking like logistically, like for within the world that we're taking place,
Yeah, I think, what's good about this sequence and the trial is that it's exactly what Tywin would not have put up with. Some sham trial by some religious fanatics where, a birthmark high on his thigh is evidence enough. Like, listen, it's anyone could have basically passed that information around.
Right.
Margaery could have mentioned it. Olenna could have mentioned it. Anybody could have mentioned this. And then, here you have someone who works in a bordello just like, mention it. As if he's intimate with Loras, right. So like obviously we the viewers understand what's going on in Loras's bed, but the fact is, in terms of a real trial, what evidence is it? Some hearsay from just one person whose job it is to really just kind of do what he's told. So like it's one of those things. It's Loras's word versus this guy's word, and. Right. It's whatever. It's should be warning sign number 1 for Cersei that they're just sort of making things up as they go along. The evidence is not quite, really, even empirical. It's just sort of just like, you can't necessarily source it to exactly what it being true or not.
Well, it's super flimsy, and on top of that, like this is also kind of like balls also in the Tyrell's court as well, because not only does this give them the impetus to arrest Margaery, where it's like, okay, so Margaery also knew about Loras' homosexuality, and your proof of this is about as stable as this whole tattoo business, but also the fact that
she walked in on them.
Right,
that's all he says.
Walked in on them.
Okay,
and then
sure, but like, Bill Clinton could have went through the multiverse portal and showed up, and like, you know what I mean? Like it's like I could say anything, and the faith militant is gonna like start grabbing people and throwing them in the prison.
Yeah, and then on
It doesn't
top
mean
of
it's
that,
true.
you mean to tell me that now both of Olenna's heirs have been arrested? You have Loras, the heir to Highgarden, and Margaery, the queen. Not the no other like ambitious. She's married to Tommen, who is the king. She is the queen. Have both been arrested, and she doesn't immediately bring the Tyrell soldiers and army into the city. Like they have to wait until all the way into next season in order to do that. That's so I'm like I said, as much as I love Olenna Tyrell, that was a little bit where it's like, oh man. Although she does get off some incredible one-liners, but the first one being when she rolls out her window after they've stopped outside the city, she's like, oh my god, you can smell the shit 5 miles from here. And then when
Yeah, that was definitely a great moment.
Oh, it's so good
in this episode. I just think Olenna has soldiers. She probably would have been brought more than needed because you got word that your son, or
Yeah.
their son, right?
Right, well, grandson, but
Yeah,
again,
grandson.
because
So
Loras doesn't have his 2 older brothers like he does in the book. Loras is effectively the heir to Highgarden. So
yeah, so like she knows how crucial this is, and she would not mess around. She would bring a contingent of soldiers to really be able to take care of business. And if Cersei's not willing to, basically she's going to supply weapons to the High Sparrow and really allow for this type of violence or whatever you want to call it, like false trials, whatever. Lena could just come in and basically bash their skulls in, so to speak, just to put it bluntly. And, it's like, what's stopping her? Why are the Night's Watch, or not the Night's Watch? Geez, they're going to come down from the wall.
Yeah, come down.
But whatchamacallit, the King's Guard,
the what's it called the Knights of the Reach. I guess if you want to call them.
So like they're not going to necessarily stop them because they're at odds with the High Sparrow too. Like I think it's like Cersei's command over everybody in King's Landing, in terms of letting this happen. Like almost anyone with a brain is going to know that this is like a terrible idea. And I don't know if they really pull off like everyone's in fear of Cersei. It's just like Cersei's pulling these strings and like no one is stopping her.
Right.
And it seems like a little,
I guess if
too
only anything
easy.
that it may just be because there is no one to stop her effectively, right? Olenna hasn't been in the city. Kevin left the city. Jaime's not here. They're literally really, Mace Tyrell has been sent away on business. There really isn't anyone in the city to be able to stop her, at least at this point. It's not until next season when Kevin and Olenna have both officially taken control of the small council and effectively removed her from power that she finally starts to receive some oversight. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah,
So.
it definitely is. One of those storylines where we're basically just marching into Cersei setting up her own demise, her own punishment. And again, we've talked about it where it's, it happens, it basically keeps them busy, and, it's just not necessarily as strong of a path as it could be. Just because, like, listen, I just feel like Olenna could very easily, any moment, like I said, bring those soldiers in, stop this trial. Maybe there's a little bit of tension between Cersei and Olenna, and like maybe that kind of sparks war. But like, why would they let these religious fanatics really just continue to grow? Like it would become a bigger dispute between the two sides, Lannister versus Tyrell.
Right. Absolutely, 100%. I don't know. It's dumb, and we'll spend more time with it in the next couple of weeks as we get closer and closer to the end of season 6.
The payoffs are cool. Like, everyone remembers the whole shame episode, and everyone remembers the explosion at the Citadel. So like those are big moments for the show. And, it's going to come down to if you believe the ends justify the means, because those moments are, something that hits in the show, and that you can enjoy those moments. But it's like the build up is just a little chaotic in getting us there.
100%. Yeah. So let's move on to some more interesting plot lines we have. We got 3 more plot lines. So first that I want to hit, the House of Black and White. We surprisingly spent a lot less time on this storyline than I thought we were going to this season. And I think that's definitely helped this storyline, at least for this season, a lot more than I thought, which is that we're still at the point where this storyline is pretty interesting. We still don't know exactly a whole lot about the house. And how it's operating. Arya's very progressively being brought into, the order and the way that things work. She had, the whole runaround of being first brought into the house in the second episode and the third episode where she was just kind of doing janitor duties. And now she's been cleaning the bodies for a while. But now you're starting to see her get to a point where, what's it called? The waif is starting to, tell her lies, some very, very convincing ones too, and start to play, the game of faces. And, Jaqen is starting to, explain some more stuff to her. It's all pretty intriguing. It's pretty cool. I like the music. Again, I still love like the setup. This is still the point where the House of Black and White, it looks really, really cool, And I think that the big takeaway from this sequence is just how Arya is going to learn exactly what the key to being a faceless man is, which is not necessarily that she has to like change her entire identity in order to become no one, right? Because that's kind of, part of the whole construction of the faceless men, but more so just a matter of she just needs to take bits and pieces of her life and mix and intermingle them and turn them into a story that she can use to her advantage, right? Because it's the whole premise around like how the faceless men are able to detect lying. It's not necessarily that you're making something up completely. It's that you're telling it almost 100% as close to the truth as possible, but it's trying to catch that one little thing in there that's not truth. It's almost like, those two truths and a lie kind of game, and so the kind of the presentation of that I still think is actually really, really fascinating and interesting. I don't know. What about you? What do you think?
No, I totally agree. Like, this is one of those storylines where it's like, oh, this is, the less you know, the better. Like, you're just being sort of brought in slowly to the world. And, we obviously got introduced to this way back in season 2 and 3. And, it's kind of been simmering on the back burner for a while. Now we're starting to really dive into it and get these details. And they're giving it to us very slow. We're just basically, the first episode of the season, right? She arrives in Braavos and, it's like she's really dismissed and has to go spend a day, in Braavos. And then eventually, it turns out that the man that, pushed her away is actually who she's looking for, and like, boom, it's this weird mystery, and we're kind of welcome to spend some time going down that road and really slowly understanding what this is about. And I feel like it's a nice slow burn. And every episode that we see this in this season is just a little bit of the puzzle, just like you're not really given much. You're just given enough to kind of remain interested. Just like she starts cleaning the bodies and it's like, why am I cleaning these bodies? You got to tell me, and so it's, there's just an atmosphere in this storyline that, allows us to sort of, take what we see and try to, as best we can, understand what's going on. And then you're just going to wait till the next sequence.
Yeah, 100%. I particularly like the moment where the waif, who, like I said, I'm famously not a fan of as a character. I think that it's all credit in the world goes to that actress. I think her name is Faye Marsay, and the story that she tells, where she tells like that whole story, and it's really convincing and it's really, really compelling. And then at the last minute she pulls it back and is like, oh, was that a truth or was that a lie? I love little bits and moments like that. I thought that was really cool. And I like how, you kind of like have like, the rite of passage moment where Arya has to, console the little girl who's clearly dying into drinking from the pool of water, and like how she's able to so convincingly say that, gives Jaqen the ammo in order to show her the Hall of Faces. And it's like, I think that all that stuff is really, really massively done. It's like, man, I guess just the fact of it's like, it's one of those storylines very similar to Tyrion's, where I'm like, oh, okay. So this is one of those storylines where it wasn't the setup that was dumb. It's weird because the more and more that I see as we go on between seasons 5 and 6, I'm realizing now that my problem is not necessarily with the entire arc across the 2 seasons in general, but more so it's kind of a pick and choose your own thing. Like, Winterfell and everything, that's a problem this season. Daenerys and Meereen, that's more so a problem this season, But Arya, Tyrion, stuff like that more so are problems that I probably don't start to notice until next season, because for right now I'm enjoying everything that I'm seeing, at least with those 2 storylines. Speaking of which, fast forwarding over to Tyrion, we get a little bit of a continuation of last week. Tyrion and Jorah after surviving the encounter with the Stone Men.
You're just trying to get past that storyline, so I don't mention the clams and the cockles. And
well we haven't gotten to it yet. We haven't gotten to it yet. So.
I just every episode of this podcast, I just have to mention like how much I do not want to get to that episode. It's like
watch the next episode now.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's always like, is it the next episode?
Like,
we're so close.
We're so close.
Like the only thing I could hope is that they basically have edited it out of the show and not told anybody, and then it just never appears. Like that's my only hope. When I tune into the next episode, before we do the next podcast, essentially it's like, please just re-edit this before we get to that point. But I guess, hey, whatever. Let's move on. Maybe my hatred of that line is a little too much.
We shall see. But look, so we get another continuation. Like I said, it's another brief moment with Tyrion and Jorah, but it's still just as much fun. It's more of conversation based. They're walking along Valyria, the Valyrian Peninsula as they're getting to Meereen. I can just imagine it's like, yeah, they're on Valyria, which is still pretty damn far from Meereen. So then Tyrion's like, oh, what, are we going to walk the entire way? He's like, yeah, we kind of have no choice. And so, they're starting to break down some more of the semantics of like, Tyrion's Tyrion figuring out Jorah's motivation. It's like, okay, so say you do this, and this, you get to Westeros, you rule. What then? How do you expect somebody who has no experience with ruling to learn how to rule? Again, just getting into the idea of more so setting up that Tyrion is going to be Daenerys' right hand going forward. It's a little bit more ham-fisted, just given how obvious it is, and just given obviously where we know it goes. But I did think that it was pretty funny how when we actually get to the bit where they get caught by the slavers, did you catch the cameo there from Adebisi or from Oz or Echo from Lost?
Yeah, well, I know him from the Oz days. I knew he was in Lost, but I never really got past the button pressing.
It's ironic because that the button pressing season was the season where he joined. So
yeah, I know. I saw him in a couple episodes, but I just couldn't basically get over basically someone I know was watching the show, and I just happened to stumble upon them and sat down and started watching a couple episodes, and it was like all about this like, oh, button. We
gotta push the button.
Yeah, and man. So let's just say that
crazy if I told you that was one of the better seasons of the show.
It would be because I basically watched like a few episodes of them just kvetching about this button, and
we have to push the button. Why do we have to push the button? That literally was that was the power of network TV back in the day, where you could literally stretch an entire storyline over 24 episodes over whether you're gonna push a fucking button or not.
Yeah, it's way too many episodes. That was David Lindelof, right?
Yeah, Lindelof. Yeah,
Lindelof. Yeah. Sorry about that, but basically, yeah, he does The Leftovers, which is definitely one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, Leftovers is fucking great from what I saw when I was watching it a little bit last year.
So like Lost, just I guess it was lost on me, but the main thing
not the first one of those jokes that has been made.
Yeah, hey, listen, not everybody can be a fan of everything, right? There's I didn't stick around and hate watch it, so I just
Well, the one thing I will say is that the last couple seasons, while they are certainly like all over the place, they are certainly entertaining to say the least. I will say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt, just based on the other shows that this creator went on and did. Like that, there aren't cool things about Lost. Like I will trust on faith of just the other work that I've seen that he's done that I've enjoyed. That he knew what he was doing to a certain degree. It's just that the whole, I think 24 was it 20 was it 24 episodes?
25 episodes in the first season, 24 and 23 in the next two.
Yeah, I think the long series orders of TV shows, definitely weighs on you at some point, and like at this point, the shorter the series the better. Like I think growing up it was always like the BBC shows that were like 5-6 episodes a series that was like, oh yeah, this is a nice length for a story. I've always liked that, and television, mainstream television in the U.S. at least has always been throughout my life like 24 episodes, And it's just a lot, maybe when it was week to week in syndication and you didn't really watch every episode, it's just like, 6 months goes by and you watch the next episode of Star Trek and you're like, oh, I've never seen this one before. TNG I'm talking about, or Voyager, not the original series. But like,
it's like, right, you're not that old.
Yeah. So, but the main thing is like, once streaming and once like even DVDs, like access to the DVD series where you can just get all the episodes and watch them back to back to back to back. Just slogging through 20 episodes plus, it just became hard. And, I think Game of Thrones, having 10 episodes per season, it definitely was a good, amount to give to us and allow us to watch week to week. And I think, towards the end of the series, my theory is that the pacing really changes because it becomes a more binge heavy show. So, anyway, all that because we have a cameo, from an awesome actor.
From a great actor.
I don't remember his name, unfortunately.
His name is, and I am probably the only person on the entire planet Earth that both knows this guy's full name and tries his best to pronounce it properly every time. His name is Adewale Akinye Agbaye. That is his name. I have spent years trying to get it. I am probably the only person on planet Earth that knows his name and attempts to pronounce it properly. But it does provide for a funny moments.
Anytime I recognize him in something, I'm just like, yeah, that's the guy. That's
he's awesome.
Adebisi, and it's just like, he's just a good actor.
Yeah, he's so awesome. He's so intense, but he's so cool in everything that he does. I remember that. I think the first thing I ever saw him in was he was one of the guys in the first G.I. Joe live action movie with Channing Tatum. I think this is the first thing that I remember seeing him in. That should give you guys an indication as to how old I am. But I was 12 when that movie came out. But the big thing for me about this storyline is it's just funny. Again, it's like the brief moment where it's like we could probably sell that guy. Cut off the dwarf's cock. It's good. Again, just more dwarf jokes at his expense. And he's just like, well, how do you, I love the line that Tyrion comes up with in order to protect himself, where he's like, how do you know that it would be a dwarf's cock? And it's like, a dwarf's cock is dwarf size. And he's like, yes, again. He's like, that's not how that works. I thought that was pretty good. But
this is sort of a sign, I watched this YouTube video. I forgot which channel it comes from. So, if the person ever stumbles upon our podcast and is like, oh, damn, you didn't give me credit, I apologize. But basically they were saying, they were talking about the end of the show, Game of Thrones, and why it kind of fell apart. And it's because Tyrion, one of the best and most intelligent characters, basically spends the rest of the series involved in these scenes. Yeah, it's all around that particular word, right? And it's it's no different here, right? They're trying to sell his private parts, and it's basically every scene from like this point to the end of the series, is almost involved around him just being foul mouthed and mentioning this. And so it's one of those things where, like, now that I've watched that video on YouTube, I can't unsee the point that this person was making.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish I knew what channel that was, because
it's more of just a setup. It's a transition scene. It gets you from point A to point B. It shows Tyrion's salesmanship, where he's able to pitch to the slavers that Jorah is a worthy fighter, and he's just like, I love the scene where Adebisi looks up and he's just like, he must be 60 years old. I just wanted the Ian Glenn to crack a thing where it's like, I'm not that old. He's like, I'm only 50, and then Tyrion's like, sure, he may be a little bit longer than truth, and he's like, but he's a great Westerosi fighter. He's like, there have been songs saying about him, and then he gives the story about killing the Dothraki screamer, little throwback to season 1. And I'm like, no, don't make us remember when the show was actually good, so don't make us do that. But yeah, that like I said, it's a small scene, it's a brief scene. The only other big takeaway from this is obviously Jorah learning about his father's death. I thought that scene was pretty good, where I also just would love to know, I'm like, this is also the moment where it's like, okay, so Westeros just starts to become like a 24-hour news cycle where somehow everybody knows about what's going on across the world, whereas remember in the earlier seasons in the show, it was all about, you would usually have to wait until like the next episode for a character to receive a letter where they were informed about, events, where it took like a full episode for the Red Wedding to get around. And now everyone just magically knows about everything that's going on, where it's like, okay, so Tyrion has known about Jeor Mormont's death for 2 seasons now, but because he's finally coming across a character where it's actually, relevant towards, he like just happened to tell them. And it's like, oh, wow, don't know how you found this out, but cool. Everyone just knows everything now, And now, of course, we get to, strangely enough, probably like, again, it's so weird because this scene has both become so overhyped and yet so deserving of all the hate that it gets, because I think the worst thing about the Dorne fight that happens is the choreography. It's really badly choreographed, and like obviously this is from a show with a show's budget, but like even by Game of Thrones standards, like we've gotten better fights than this, so like I don't know, like
yeah, I think in terms of like Jaime, it's basically he's just kind of standing there getting hit with his metal arm, and he's always backing up, and that's it. They don't really do.
And Bronn has to do a
majority.
Bronn has to do a majority of the fighting, and once again, Bronn steals every single scene that he's in because that's just what Bronn does now. And Bronn is just like, when Bronn just says, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" as soon as he sees the sand snakes, that kills me every single time, and especially since it starts that little weird micro thing that he has with what's her name with Tyene, the youngest one, the one who it's really weird. It's so strange. I mean, it's cool seeing like Jaime be reunited with Myrcella and all, but
what I'm gonna say is I think I liked everything, like from Dr. Bashir, another Star Trek.
Just start calling him that now. Just start calling him that now. Forget his character's name. He's just Dr. Bashir from now on.
I'm sorry, that character from Deep Space Nine is just one of my favorite characters of all time. So, he's always that to me. Even though in this context he's just a king. But like, the main thing is, him just kind of like telling his, guard, presumably one of his best warriors, like, be prepared to use that axe. It's bringing this like, oh man, like he is ready for fighting. He has some sort of plan. Like it's just peppering in a hint that this Dornish storyline is going to be awesome. And, even with Tristan and Myrcella, just like their relationship and how it's developed, and, it's definitely, dare I say, a cute scene between the two of them.
Yeah.
Of just like their relationship and young lovers, just what they're concerned about, and, how they're sort of wooing each other. And, it definitely kind of like fits. It's like a nice picturesque moment. And then obviously Jaime and Bronn come in. They got the blood on these uniforms that they're hiding in, and they're trying to have like a very reasonable conversation with Tristan and with Myrcella. And Tristan is like, spots the blood, and Bronn's like, don't do anything stupid. Nothing has to happen here. And all that stuff is cool. Like, I think, just like them sneaking in, them trying to have a conversation with Myrcella, and even, being brutally honest with Tristan, what's going on, that really makes for an awesome scene. And then it's like, enter the Sand Snakes, and just somehow it implodes into the mess of a sequence.
Just an absolute complete mess. And I'll tell you why, for me, it also becomes a mess. It's just because of the fact that, like, we really don't get anything from it. They come in, the fight happens, the Doran's soldiers show up and arrest all of them, and then that's it. We don't get anything from it. We get one scene afterwards where the Sand Snakes are trying to torture Bronn in the jail cell. Which
that's probably next episode.
Yeah,
right?
You have Myrcella visiting, and Myrcella visiting with Jaime, and then you have like their court trial scene, and then Doran just sends everybody home. Like I said, there's no payoff, there's no intrigue, there's nothing that comes from it. We don't even get like any more like action follow-ups or anything. It just, nothing happens. It's just this. I'm like, it just makes me wonder. It's like, wait, this was their whole plan? I'm like, this was not that great of a plan. I'm sorry. It's like, you thought you were gonna take her in broad daylight. Obviously, yeah, Jaime and Bronn kind of ended up accidentally stopping their plot, but their plan. But it's like, come on, just the fact that it's like this plan ended up being so badly executed. It's like, there had to have been some more thought that was put into this. Which again, it's like, in the books, this is a very long, very complex, very drawn out thing. Like there are multiple different steps to it. It's revealed because somebody betrayed them. There's intrigue, there's suspense there, and here it's just like, nope, one quick action scene that it's done with. And then we're just
I think in terms of the action scene, again, it comes down to the fantasy booking. How would we do it? And I think it's you have this scene where Bronn and Jaime show up. They're trying to rescue Myrcella, and they knock Tristan down. Then the Sand Snakes come in and they start having a battle. But why not get to a point where they're about to stab Myrcella, and Bronn steps in and takes the cut on the arm and really disarms them and stops them, and maybe even Bronn and Jaime are about to kill one of them, and then that's when the troops come in and stop it, like drop your weapons, because now they've caught Jaime and Bronn red-handed about to kill someone in the Dornish kingdom.
Right.
And that can really lead to a dangerous situation. And then you can have Bronn, obviously, since he took a bullet for Myrcella, so to speak, you could have that whole storyline about him being poisoned and, them being able to give the cure because, they didn't intend to kill him. So they have really no incentive to let him die. And so, and it also sets up the whole idea of the poison and the antidote and, really for the later death of Myrcella. So, I think it's just like with a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of changes to the storyline and what's going on, this could have been a scene that, you and I would have been really hyped about. Otherwise, like, I guess it's not the worst scene I've ever seen in the show, but
especially considering that it's like this is the one that had people freaking out and being like, no, and literally caused the creators to just drop the entire Dorne storyline. I'm like, I'm sorry, this show. And also just in other shows in general, there have been a lot worse scenes. And the only thing that I can really say in order to wrap up this episode is, man, Ellaria Sand is no Arya and Martell. Because let me tell you something, Arya and Martell, she would have looked over this shit and just laughed her ass off. Because this is not at all how she carried out her plan in the books. Arya and Martell, of course, being Doran Martell's eldest daughter and Tristane's sister. That does not exist in the show in any capacity. So with that being said, that was our recap of the most controversial episode of Game of Thrones up to this point, season 5, episode 6, Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken. Let us know your guys' thoughts in the comment section on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you are listening to it. And be sure to listen to every new episode of Talkin Thrones that we have that goes up every single Friday from now all the way up until the finale. We'll be back next week with season 5, episode 7, entitled The Gift. Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, basically Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. That's where I'm posting stuff. I have a couple things to post, and I just gotta, open up my, photo app on my phone and get posting. But I'm slowly starting to put things out there, just things that I'm doing. And, what is it? Follow and take a look when I actually throw something on there.
Indeed. And of course, be sure to follow me myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin TV podcast, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter feeds across all of those platforms. Be sure to also click subscribe. Be sure to also subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch channels if you aren't already. And as always, people, 12 seasons of a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week.